All right, so welcome back once again. We are continuing our journey through Mark, and we are going to be in Mark chapter 8, verses 27 to 30 today. And we are looking at this text for Sunday, the 22nd of May, which is going to be Senior Sunday. And so we'll be having some, we'll have spent some time talking with our graduates and what their plans are for the upcoming years. And then at least one of them is going to share a little bit about how the church has impacted her. And so we're excited about that. But I'm going to talk a little bit about Peter's declaration about Jesus and looking at the question of who do you say that I am? I'll get there, get to that text in just a minute, but want to back up to the beginning of chapter 8 and walk us up to that point. So much like in the middle portion of the Gospel of Luke, here in the middle portion of the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is on the move. He's going different places. He's traveling around. We talked about last week how he moves outside of Galilee and he goes to the north and west up to the Mediterranean coast, Tyre and Sidon. And we'll see here that he is making his way back to towards the Jordan River in the scene that we'll take a look at. But so as chapter 8 opens, Jesus he's had the conversation with the Syrophoenician woman. He heals a deaf man, and then it says, in those days there was again a great crowd without anything to eat. And so he feeds them this time with 7 loaves, and then they also find that they had a few small fish. So this time he feeds 4,000 people with 7 loaves and a few small fish, and so they end up with 7 baskets full of broken pieces. And then at the end of that section, which is verses 9 and 10, it says there were about 4,000 people. He sent them away, and immediately he got into the boat with his disciples, and he went to the district of Dalmanutha. So there's other ancient authorities that read Magdala or Magdala. And if he went to Magdala, that's where Mary Magdalene would have been from. So that's where she actually gets her name. The way that personal associations with cities or territories or things like that are done in Hebrew and Aramaic is that if you're from, like, I think the easiest one is, like, if you're from Philistia, then you're a Philistine. So if you're from Magdala, then you're a Magdalene. Anyway, so that's a little bit of that. But so Jesus is moving back across the sea, the Sea of Galilee, and he is. They get in a boat and they go to Dalmanutha, and then he enters back into Jewish territory because the Pharisees show up. The Pharisees would not have gone into Gentile country, and they begin to argue with him and demanding a sign. And he says he won't give them a sign. And then he leaves there. He gets in the boat and he goes across to the other side. So he's in the boat, in and out, all over the place. And then there's the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. The disciples are in the boat. They've forgotten to bring any bread. And so Jesus tells them in verse 15, watch out, beware the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. And they say to one another, they reason with one another, well, it's because we didn't bring any bread. He's talking about yeast. And he looks at him and goes, why are you talking about bread? And do you not understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes and fail to see? Do you have ears and fail to hear? And do you not remember? And then he goes on and he says, I broke the bread and I fed 5,000 people. And he says, how many pieces did you collect? And they said 12 baskets full. And then had 7 loaves for 4,000 people. And how many basketfuls did we collect? And they said 7. And he asked them, do you not yet understand? Then there's a really cool healing that goes on and begins in verse 22, where much like the man who's deaf at the end of chapter 7, Jesus takes him aside again. So they come to Bethsaida, which is on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, the northern part of the Sea of Galilee. And the people bring a blind man to him, and they begged him to touch him. And so he takes the blind man by the hand, he leads him out of the village. And so then he puts saliva on his eyes and lays hands on him. And then Jesus asks the man, can you see anything? And the man looks up and he says, I can see people, but they look like trees walking, which is just this interesting little image of this people walking around, and he says they look like trees. So then Jesus lays his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. So lots of people want to make, interesting comments about how it took 2 times for Jesus to heal this man. Maybe he was extra blind or something like that, or maybe Jesus didn't, believe he could heal him sometime. But for whatever reason, Jesus does this miracle in 2 parts, and it's and then he says to him, in verse 26, he sends him away to his home, but he says, do not even go into the village. And normally when Jesus heals somebody, he sends them to, do what they need to do. Sometimes he sends them away not to say anything. Sometimes he sends them away to be quiet. Sometimes he sends them to the temple or to the synagogue to present the right offerings, things like that. But here he says, don't even go into the village, which is interesting because that's where he lives and that's where it would have been his support system. So, I'm not entirely sure what all is going on there. But he, there's this, the way that the healing works is that it's saliva plus hands the first time, and he sees trees, and then he puts his hands back on his eyes again, and then he's able to see the second time. So then we get to the passage we're going to talk about on Sunday the 22nd, which is Peter's declaration about Jesus. So they're traveling again, and they're going on to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. Now, Caesarea Philippi is north of the Sea of Galilee. It's in Roman territory, and it's named for Caesar's son Philip, and it's on a major trade route. So they're going. It says, verse 27 says, Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. So Jesus is, again, he's walking with his disciples. He's moving them around, and this is, they're moving outside of Jewish territory. They're moving into Gentile territory in this Roman, these Roman villages in near Caesarea Philippi. And he's this looks to me like this. We get this insight into the traveling conversation that they're having. We get this insight into what are they talking about while they move from place to place in between miracles or feedings or healings and things like that. What are they discussing along the way? And it seems like one of the things they're discussing along the way is what are people saying about Jesus? So two things come to mind here. One is that it sounds like there are times where the disciples are apart from Jesus, interacting with different people, and Jesus in their gathering back together wants to know, what are people saying about me? Not for ego or anything like that, but just to hear, what is it? What's the what's the murmuring? What's the what's being said about him in relation to healings and his travels and the way that he's interacting with the Jewish authorities and that kind of stuff. What is being said about him? So he specifically says, who do people say that I am? And the people, they give three answers. One is John the Baptist. So John the Baptist is Jesus's cousin. And he was the one who prepares the way of the Lord. And he's also the one that Herod beheaded. So Herod is, John the Baptist is dead at this point. But others say Elijah. Elijah was a powerful Old Testament prophet. He spoke to kings. He spoke to Ahab. He runs from in First Kings. He runs from Jezebel and Ahab. He runs out to Mount Horeb, and he hears the voice of the Lord and the still small voice. So Elijah is a famous prophet from the Old Testament, and then they say sort of generically one of the other prophets. So maybe one of the big six or one of the minor prophets, and so there's this understanding that most people are aligning Jesus with a prophetic voice, because John the Baptist would be a prophetic voice as well, that's speaking truth to power, and is bumping up against the religious authorities, but is certainly proclaiming the good news of God, the word of God to the people, and so there's truth to all of that. But Jesus then goes further and asks the next question, which is, who do you say that I am? And he asks this to the 12, who have spent significant amount of time with him at this point. They've watched him, feed now 5,000 people and 4,000 people. They've watched him heal blind men and deaf people. They've seen a woman who's bleeding has stopped, and children be raised from the dead, or the demon possessed. I mean, they've seen him do all of these miracles. And so he points to them and he asks, who do you say that I am? And Peter, ever the enthusiast, ever the one that wants to go first and give Jesus the right answer and to show how much he knows, he says, you are the Messiah. Now we know, according to the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 16, where this scene plays out there, that Jesus says to him that you have answered well. I'm just going to jump over there real quick. It's in Matthew 16, beginning in verse 13. And again, they're in Caesarea Philippi, so they have it in the same place. And Simon Peter answers, and this is verse 16, says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. So Matthew's telling of this scene is a little more expanded, a little more from Peter, saying not only is he the Messiah, but also the Son of the living God, and then more response from Jesus. In fact, Mark just jumps to just Jesus having them sternly ordering them not to tell anyone about him, and but Matthew goes and says and congratulates Peter, tells him that he's found the right answer, and then he goes on to say that he is Peter, which is a Greek name. Remember, his real name is Simon. Jesus calls him Peter, which is from Petros, which is rock in Greek. So your name is Rock, or Rocky, I think is the way that Eugene Peterson translated it in the Message. And on this rock I will build my church. So there's that play on words there. So he gives Peter the credit of having the right answer and the right understanding. But then when push comes to shove in later in the gospel, and even including the very next scene, they still don't understand. Even Peter, who's proclaimed that Jesus is the Messiah, doesn't understand what the Messiah whom Jesus is really means. So I'm going to finish out chapter 8 real quick, and then we can jump back into the text. So in verse 31, Jesus begins to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this all quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciple, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." So as soon as Jesus, so Peter's made this declaration: "You are the Messiah, you're the Christ, you're the anointed one, and you're the one who's come to set us free." As soon as he's made this declaration, Jesus begins to explain what it means for him to be the Messiah. For the Son of Man has to suffer. He's going to be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed. On third day, rise again. So he begins to lay out what the rest of his ministry will look like. And Peter doesn't want to hear that. Peter may say, "You're the Messiah, you're the Christ," but he's not fully comprehending the way that Jesus is going to play out and fulfill the role of the Savior as he's laid it out here. And so just as Jesus took this man, the man at Bethsaida, who was blind, and took him aside and pulled him out of the village, Peter pulls Jesus aside and begins to rebuke him. Although Jesus heals the man who was blind, Peter rebukes Jesus, and then Jesus turns right around and rebukes him back for not understanding what he is doing. That transition here. So in 2 weeks, on the last Sunday in May, I'll be talking about the Transfiguration Story, which is the opening few verses of chapter 9. And so this, the text for this week for the 22nd, from Mark 27 through to Mark 9, verse 8. They're sort of a unit that all is all fit together. And about who Jesus is, and how the disciples see him, how people see him, and how Jesus will defy expectations that people have of him. Okay, I'm gonna stop for just a minute and see what questions you might have, or if I ran past something too quickly, I'm happy to go back and go over it again.
When he asks, who do men say that I am, and and they answer, what some of the people believe.
Mhm.
Are they saying that they believe that these people have been resurrected, to have come back again to preach to them, or to prophesy again for them?
Yeah, that's my understanding, is that they believe that somehow Jesus is this. They probably may not have used either reincarnation or a resurrected kind of understanding, but they believe that somehow he's embodying those prophets and coming back to them to re-prophesy the things that are going to happen. The same things, like Elijah spoke to Ahab, and Ahab was an awful king in Israel, just like the worst almost. And so, but he spoke truth to Ahab, and so for him to be Elijah is an understanding that Jesus has this prophetic voice that he's using to speak to those who have driven the people of Israel away from God, and he's trying to bring them back. And same with John the Baptist, who was or the other prophets. I mean, all the prophets had in the Old Testament, that was their job. It was either Israel or Judah, and they said, you've strayed from what God has done, and you need to come back, and here's what he says, and here's what you need to do. That was their message. I mean, in a nutshell, that was all of their messages. It just depends on whether it was the Assyrians or the Babylonians, or whether it was the kings that were doing it themselves, whatever. And then for John the Baptist, obviously they would have, many of them would have known who he was, or heard, stories recently, because he's only been dead for a little while. And so the idea that he's again, because John very clearly said, I'm not the Messiah. I come to prepare the way. And so it's interesting that they think that Jesus is actually John the Baptist, because then he would still be preparing the way for somebody else. And so I think that the connection between the people saying that Jesus is John the Baptist is a miss for, or it leads to Jesus asking the deeper question about, who do you say that I am? I think that if people are saying he's John the Baptist, then there's still somebody else out there. And if the disciples say that he's John the Baptist, reinvigorated, reincarnated, resurrected, whatever you want to say, then the disciples have missed who Jesus is. But then when Peter says, you're the Messiah, and he says it in front of everybody, then it begins that process of, okay, they at least get that I'm not somebody coming back, but I'm somebody brand new, and that I'm doing something new, that I'm at some level, I think they understand the disciples understand that that Jesus is coming to complete what all of those prophets, including John the Baptist, tried to do.
It's kind of like, Jesus is trying to, is trying to see maybe how his teaching has affected, if the people are believing in him. And then he at least hopes that the disciples believe in him. But then, then Peter turns around and, rebukes Jesus. So it's like the next statement is like, you still don't get it. And Jesus is so frustrated. It's like,
oh yeah,
so frustrated.
Yeah, if this was a movie, I would imagine that Jesus would do a face palm, just like,
oh, not again. But didn't even back as far as Moses, wasn't it predicted that they would say that God would send another leader to them, well, maybe I don't remember exactly what it says, but I know at some point it was predicted that there would be another leader coming, that like Elijah, that that if the Jewish people read their scriptures, they would know that, right? And
right.
Look
yeah, and the Old Testament is full of allusions to the Messiah coming, to the Savior coming. And they look towards, they look towards Moses as the deliverer from Egypt and all that. And then they look to Joshua to lead them into the land. And then it doesn't take very long before they want a king. And they look at Saul first, and then David. And David gets lifted up as the ruler above all. He's the one that everybody gets compared back to, unless it's bad, then you get compared to oh goodness, get me to messing up. I can't remember who they all compare it to. It's like, at least you're not as bad as this guy. But then what they continue to see is that none of those leaders, whether they were kings or even Moses, that they made the people fully whole. And so then Jesus comes onto the scene and does what the others cannot do. And again, so on the 29th, we'll talk about the Transfiguration, and Moses and Elijah are the ones who appear on the mountain with Jesus. So if you just think about those guys, so Moses represents the law, Elijah represents the prophets, and Jesus represents the new covenant. And so in this moment, you see the three pieces of Israelite history coming together. And in the end, only Jesus is left. So, but that's for next week's video. So, anyway, but yes, I would think that Jesus would find it incredibly frustrating that Peter made this declaration, and then in the next instant, he goes, wait, you can't do that. That's not how it's supposed to go. I know how it's supposed to go. You should do it this way. No.
You think that when Peter denies Jesus at the end, he's thinking back on that, when he said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then he thinks, I've just denied knowing the Son of God. You think that entered into his head at all when he?
I think so. I mean, because we jump ahead to chapter 14. Yeah. Well, even when Jesus tells him, foretells that Peter's going to deny him, he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to. Let's see. Even though he says, he says, this is 14:31. He said vehemently, this is Peter, even though I must die with you, I will not deny you. And then all of a sudden, all the others said the same. But then at the end of chapter 14 and beginning in verse 66, Peter's in the courtyard, and he denies him 3 times, each time more rigidly. And then verse 71, he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know this man that you're talking about." At that moment, the cock crowed for the second time. And then Peter remembered that Jesus had said to him, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and he wept. So, yeah, I think in that moment, Peter realizes the weight of what he has done because of the weight of who Jesus is. I think in the moment, in the denials, and we'll get there when we get to chapter 14 later this fall, that he was worried about his own skin in that moment. Yeah, he said, I'm not gonna deny you. I'm gonna go to death with you. And then when push comes to shove, he didn't hold up that end of the bargain. Now, I don't want to beat up on Peter too much. He's a good guy, so he did come back around.
Well, you could say there's a little bit of Peter in all of us,
Absolutely.
that, when push comes to shove, are we willing to do that full commitment, that,
Right.
that we're, that our faith wavers too for a little bit. So yeah, we can't beat up on Peter when he's a little bit in all of us.
Yep. Yeah, we all do it. Yeah. Very good. All right, other questions?
I was thinking that the healing of the blind man, most of the time when he healed, there was a big crowd around, a lot of witnesses, but it seems like this time he took the man out of town, like there wasn't anybody to see,
Right.
to see him healing him.
Yeah. So he takes him out of town or out of the village to heal him, and it's similar to the way that he did back in 733. He takes the deaf man aside so that it's only he and Jesus, and so it's the one in chapter 7. His ears are immediately opened, and this time it's a 2-part deal where he puts saliva in his hands on his eyes, and the man sees trees walking around, and then he puts his hands on him again, and then he's able to see clearly. So, but both times, yeah, they're related in that both times he pulls them aside, and most of the time, like even if you get to if you read into chapter 9, you see the boy that has the spirit that throws him into the fire and tries to kill him. He does that right in front of he does that healing right in front of everybody. So the crowd came running, and he rebuked the unclean spirit, so there's most of the time the healings happen within the context of a group of people watching, and but these two happen sort of more privately. And he did that with Jairus' daughter. He only let in Peter, James, and John, and mom and dad, so there were only six people in the room, plus the little girl. And again, he tries to keep everything a little quiet. Tells the blind man not to go back into the village, presumably to not tell people what just happened. Tells the disciples not to talk about who Jesus is. So there's this ongoing theme throughout the Gospel of Mark of mystery, trying to keep Jesus's reputation and who he really is sort of as low key as possible. And people theorize that it's about if Jesus just exploded onto the scene and gained instant popularity and then threw out the Messiah thing to everybody, then number one, Rome would get word of it and start breathing down his neck, and certainly the Jewish authorities would work really hard to get rid of him, and there's just, he knows that there's work to do, there's people to heal, and there's disciples to get ready to take over when he leaves, or when he's ascends into heaven, and to go to the cross. So that whole Mark and mystery kind of thing is played out here as well. Okay. All right. Anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay, you are very welcome. Thanks for all you do. Appreciate you. And as I always say, if y'all have any questions along the way, give me a shout. I'll be happy to chat with you. So
Okay.
take care. Have a good week.
You too. Bye.